What's going on, everyone? I'm Jeff St. Pierre, and this is episode 158 of the Adult Education Podcast. Today, we have educator and pop culture enthusiast Veronica Litt. The term pop culture sometimes gets a negative connotation. Like if something is deemed to be pop culture, then somehow it's less than. As if the popular consumption of an item makes it any less serious or less impactful. But that's not how I see pop culture. I see it as a snapshot into a particular time. It provides a window so that we can see and experience what life was like for the people that were in it. I think about movies from my youth. You know, when I go and I show my daughter The Goonies, it's going to be a chance for her to understand what my world looked like in 1985. Well, sort of. I mean, I didn't grow up in the Pacific Northwest, and I didn't go on dangerous treasure hunts with my friends, but I think you know what I mean. The clothes, the music, the language, and the general attitudes of the characters. Now, some pop culture entities can be and should be taken at face value, but there are others that have layers to them, layers that not everyone sees on the first viewing. Today's episode of the Adult Education Podcast is going to take a deep dive into one of the most iconic pieces of pop culture from the 90s. We're talking about the classic film Clueless. I remember seeing this movie for the first time when it came out, and even as like a 14-year-old, I felt like there was something more to it than what was being marketed in trailers and commercials. It's a very deep film, and I think that's why it stood the test of time. In fact, I was just asking two 23-year-old girls that I work with if Clueless was still a thing, and they said, yeah, it's amazing. So there you go. Joining me today is Veronica Litt. She's an educator in Nova Scotia, Canada, where she teaches post-secondary classes on English literature. Veronica also happens to be a Clueless lover and has written a book in the pop classic series called Ugh, As If. The book is released on June 3rd, and I think this conversation will definitely make you want to go out and get it. Hi.
Hey, how are you?
I'm great. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm really excited to be here. Thanks so much for having me on.
I am so excited that you're excited because this is, I feel like I didn't realize how much I needed a long essay on the importance of Clueless until I read this book.
Oh, thank you. That's what I want. That was the goal, right?
Well, you know, and I'm just going to jump right into it, Veronica, since we're here. The book is called Ugh, As If, from Clueless. It's part of this whole series, first of all, which I think is kind of fascinating. This is the first book from the series that I had seen. So now I feel like I have to go all the way back. But it's a series called The Pop Classics, which takes a look at a lot of different movies and a lot of different pop culture things over the years. And I need to go check out more of these. I feel like when I watched the movie in 1995, when I first saw it, I was like 14 years old. But even then I thought there's something bigger to this movie than what it is on the screen, right? Like it was sold as a way to get people into the theaters, but I'm like, why do I like this movie so much?
Yeah, I think that is maybe something that you can find with anything you pay attention to, like enough attention, enough consideration. Nothing is as simple as it seems, including like frothy girly media and guilty pleasures like Clueless, which is a lot of what the book sort of starts out with, this idea that there's a lot of culture like reality TV, rom-coms, teen comedies that maybe just gets lumped under this idea that it's just entertainment and thus it's stupid and we don't need to pay any attention to it because all it wants to do is distract us. But the basic idea of the book is, well, what if you thought really, really hard about that entertainment that is allegedly so silly and not worth thinking about? It turns out you can learn lots of stuff. So I started studying pop culture because I think it's where things hide in plain sight. It's where we sort of tell on ourselves in the mainstream. And so when I started thinking hard about Clueless, I sort of wound up outlining this book pretty naturally. And so I've got chapters about these sort of more weighty concerns that are sort of, like I said, hiding in plain sight throughout just these 90 sparkling minutes. So this book is about class and romance and race and, you know, the challenge of building community and consumerism. You know, even though it's bright and shiny and frothy, it's got a lot of interesting things to say.
Yeah, you say frothy and you say bright and shiny. But even still, I mean, again, I'm talking about being 14, 15 years old, seeing it for the first time. Even still, I don't think it's hiding as much as some people might think it's. I think it's pretty much out in the open that this is touching on some pretty, like you reference in the book too. I'm jumping ahead in my notes a little bit, but you reference in the book, the movie Kids. And the movie Kids came out around the same time. And I tried to go back and rewatch that after I read about it in the book. It's insufferable to me. Like
it's horrendous, yes.
and I grew up in small town New Hampshire. we were kind of a suburb of Boston, but not really. So like, I feel like I teetered on the edge of a few different types of communities that you would see in these 90s teen dramas. And I think Clueless is much more true to form about real life than Kids would ever consider itself to be. Like, I think Kids is such a fake story that was meant to seem important, where Clueless is like a real story that people were like, nah, I don't know. It's kind of bubbly for me.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that again just goes back to this really pernicious and widespread hierarchy of art. So, and this is like speaking very broadly, right? There's this
Sure.
idea that tragedy is the important, serious genre that will teach us things and reveal us to ourselves and shift the dial. And that comedy is, again, there for distraction and enjoyment. And I think you're right that actually a lot of these like gritty realist movies are just really smug and cringe and embarrassing. And that comedy might be, ironically, and maybe, like unexpectedly, the place we can turn to actually learn something and to learn something really generative and optimistic. So, one of my beefs with movies like Kids and these tragedies that are all, they're about how awful we are, how gritty the world is, how cynical you have to be to survive. It's just that they're so pessimistic that you almost get to a nihilistic place where it's like, well, why bother doing anything? Like if the world is this brutal and awful, why even live at all? And so I think that comedies, again, hiding in plain sight, they just help us chart a course for a much more optimistic, hopeful world. And they sort of hide that profundity in plain sight. And that's what I think is so beautiful about them.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And you talk about in the book how like we shouldn't really be ashamed of our love of popcorn movies or easy to digest material in a way. Like we're talking about Clueless, which I think has a lot more to digest than people might let on. But on its face, like if you just went to go watch a movie, okay, you're watching a 90-minute rom-com and you're probably going to walk away enjoying yourself. But we shouldn't think down on ourselves for enjoying those movies and that entertainment.
I totally agree. And then it's also sort of like what is the script telling you that your enjoyment is so frivolous in the first place, that only your pain is worth its weight. Like no, happiness and enjoyment are also equally valid and complicated emotional states. So yeah, maybe basically the big thesis at the back of the book is like comedy matters, hope matters, optimism matters, and they are just as sophisticated and complex as like doom and gloom nihilism.
I went through a phase for quite a few years, and it's so silly to think about it now, but where I would only read nonfiction books because it had to be a memoir or it had to be some deep dive into a topic because I mean, why would I waste my time reading a fiction book, right? Like
Right.
it's not important to read someone's story about a but now I read them, I'm like, this is what I need in my life. Like the real
Mhm.
world is hard enough that a
Yeah.
fiction novel right now is exactly, please take me to a faraway place or a haunted house or whatever. Like take me somewhere out of my world. And I just think, why did I let myself fall into that trap? Where like
Mhm.
fiction is not important. I have to read the important things in this world.
Yeah, I've totally been there too, right? Like, just even going to undergrad and reading the canon can't help but be like King Lear and Hamlet, right? So even in fiction, you wind up defaulting to that kind of thing. But yeah, escapism gets a bad rap as like maybe overly distracting people from the here and now. But escapism can also be a way of considering alternatives. And you return to the real world refreshed and energized and inspired to make it better. So escapism forever, man.
I don't think escapism is quite the word that you use in the book, and maybe I'm reading it differently, but I think you were talking a little bit more of like the rich white people fantasy at that
I
point.
do mention that,
Yes,
yes.
yeah, but escapism brought this back, and I'm all over my notes right now. Like I'm gonna have such a hard time finding my questions because we have jumped all around already in the first 7 minutes of this conversation. But you talk about how these movies like Clueless, these the rich white people fantasy movies are just as outrageous as Marvel movies, but they're viewed differently. Like people view Clueless on a different plane than the Avengers.
Yeah, so that term is from a cultural critic named Ariel Zibrak, the RWPF, the rich white people fantasy, and the kind of thing you see in like a Nancy Meyers movie
Mhm.
or virtually any like early aughts rom-com where these characters are living in New York and they're like, I'm so broke, but they have this beautiful apartment. And you're like, you're fine. You're actually okay, Kate Hudson. And so her claim, it dovetails nicely with what we've been talking about, is again this idea that like, a Marvel movie people are more likely to celebrate it, even though it's really outrageous. But these movies, made by women for women, they sort of get labeled with like, well, you're bad art. You're bad art in a different way, in a morally bad way. Your outrageousness is sort of like harmful to society. And she makes the, I think, really brilliant point, and this is all credit to Ariel Zibrak. She did this, not me. But she basically says that rich white people fantasy movies are about superpowers. They're about the superpower that is social power, the power of being at the top of that societal heap. Like, someone in a Nancy Meyers movie, the privilege and the comfort they have to move through the world without any challenge or trouble, or any trouble they encounter is harmless and charming. And of course, they'll be happy at the end of it, right? It is kind of like a superhero flying through the air. It's just a different generic set of features to tell a very similar story. Also, I will take full blame for our conversation bouncing around.
No, it's okay.
Because I'm an ADHD girly and I'm very excited to chat with you.
No, I knew going into this is funny, Veronica. I knew going into this, it was going to be a challenging conversation because again, as I said right at the beginning, I didn't realize how badly I wanted this long essay about Clueless in my life until I read this. And I have not fully finished it because I'm a painfully slow reader and I'm so terrible at that. But
No judge.
I know my brain is going all over the place too. And from what I did read, I have all these notes that I made where like, even if I didn't form out an entire question, like I just have a note here on my page that says rich white people fantasy. And I'm like, okay, I know this is somewhere. Where is
Yeah.
I knew we were going to be everywhere. So let me go back actually to the beginning because I think that also kind of ties in because there's this classic pop culture question and it involves The Breakfast Club, the movie The Breakfast Club. We watch this story of these kids all from different social situations and social statuses in Saturday detention. And the question is, when they go back to school on Monday, do they talk to each other? And there's two camps, right? There's one where it's like, yeah, they made a bond in Saturday detention and they will, forever be friends, yada, yada, yada. But then there's also the other camp that says no, because the second they go back through those doors, they fall into their social status again, and that bond disappears because that's how strong a social status can be in high school. Now, I wonder, with Clueless, do Cher and Josh have a future outside of this view into their life? Because I personally don't think so. But I want to hear your
Josh of it all. Oh, that is a really odd part of the movie, isn't it? It's the fact that they're the age difference, they're not related, but they grew up together. I know a lot of people feel icky about it. I'm a Cher Josh defender. I'm like,
I noticed that in the book. Yeah.
Related. Are you? What do you think of it?
So I'm not a defender. I think I've always thought it was weird just because of the reason why they have a relationship, despite the fact they're not blood related. The reason why they have a relationship and they met even in the first place is because their parents were married. So that always felt a little strange, which is why I think their relationship doesn't last because I think the social status of that would get too heavy. Like everyone would be like, wait, how did you guys meet? Like, I think that would be way too heavy, especially for Cher, just because of the world that she lives in. Despite her growth in the movie, I still think there's a social pressure of you met because your parents were married. That's kind of strange. You know what I mean? So that's my thought. I do think there's a beautiful love story in the film. And you talk about that. And you even mention it in the book. You say, yeah, I think it's a beautiful love story, mostly. Like it's a little weird, but there is something, so I do agree with you on that. But I would love for you to go back into your thoughts about that.
Yeah, I mean, like I have some thoughts about the Breakfast Club of it, which is I feel like the thing that would happen would be in between the two, where like, yeah, I get it. Probably high school is so brutal in terms of, needing to be who people expect you to be. We've all gone through high school. It's really hard to be the brave kid who steps outside the line, and it's easier to just go with it. But I do think that weekend together, it did change the way these characters are internally. So maybe when they get past high school, they'll be more mature in a way that their peers aren't. So, that's another thing I think about, which is just having the patience to let someone develop in time and being realistic but optimistic. And then in terms of Cher and Josh, okay, yes. So I think we're 90% of the way to a really sweet love story. And I have two thoughts about your option of like, well, will they work out? And your point that Cher would cave to social pressure. I feel like she wouldn't.
Okay.
Because she's powerful enough. She's at the apex. No one's going to mess with her. She can do what she wants. Like, I remember even in the scene when her and Dion, they first see Ty, Cher's like, I'm going to take her in. I'm going to make over this girl. And Dion says, you can't. She will plummet our stock. And she's like, I don't care. I'm going to do it anyway. And she pulls it off. right? Like,
Yeah.
so she can just, and this is one of the things that's so magical about her character and about the Ditz character at large, which is because, you and me live in the world of like, you can't do that. It's social suicide. You can't date your ex stepbrother. That's outrageous. Because like we've been infected with social scripts. But Ditz characters, and I write about this in the book, Ditz characters are kind of like blissfully immune from social expectations because they sort of wake up every day, brain empty, no thoughts. And that means they're like very receptive to alternatives and things being different than what we would expect. So even if the whole world is telling Cher, that's weird, she'd be like, I don't think it's weird. That's fine. If maybe it is, but that doesn't bother me, right? Because my happiness matters more than this social
Mm.
script. And the intricacies of how I understand my own experience matter more than what you might think about it. So I think they do have a shot, but I write this in the book. It's like, just make him younger. Just make him go to another high school. Make him like a neighbor. Like he doesn't need to be the ex stepbrother and he doesn't need to be in university. That's my bigger
Right.
problem.
Yeah,
But
because
yeah,
she's supposed to be what, 16? Because she's just getting her driver's
16.
license. So she's 16 and he's in college. So do they ever specify like what year in college? I don't think they do, right?
They don't, but no matter what year, it's
It's
bad.
still interesting. Yeah, I remember being at a prom, and having someone with a college boyfriend coming in. It's like, why is that dude here? Like, who brought the
I
old guy?
know. I knew a girl in high school who was dating a college guy. And even then, we were like, no, why isn't he dating a girl in college? You got to get out of there.
You
Yeah.
like maybe get a pass if you were dating before they went to college, but that's the only
Yes.
way you get a pass.
Totally agree. Yeah. Yeah. Totally. Totally. I really do think they're a sweet match, Cher and Josh, despite the ick. But anyway, yes.
Well, there is, yeah, and you talk about this in the book. There's an importance to their relationship in that Josh helps to open her eyes to things that she otherwise never would have seen. And he, I'm not saying that he like forces her change, but he is a major catalyst to her change over the film through the period that we're watching her life in the film, because she really does start to see how much bigger the world is besides just this piece that she lives in.
Yeah, and that's the downside of the Ditz character, which is that lovely innocence can also really quickly harden into sort of willful ignorance.
Mm.
And so I think it's really necessary to keep Cher likable and to keep this movie as buoyant and clever as it is, that you need a voice of reason like Josh to be like, you live in this little bubble and you have to be part of the world. Like as much as it's refreshing that you can exit yourself from it, the way to make the world better is to, get your hands dirty and join it. So I think that he is a great character for a male love interest because he cultivates goodness in himself. He cultivates compassion and empathy and communication. Like he's just, I don't, the term nice guy has baggage now, but
Yes.
he is a kind man and he has taken like the time to develop those aspects of his personality. And it was just really refreshing. I write about this more in the romance chapter to see a male lead be celebrated as simultaneously kind and good without being boring and dull. You often see movies from that time and going into now with franchises like After or The Summer I Turned Pretty.
Yeah.
You see this sort of dichotomy between like sexy bad boy who treats you poorly but he's so hot, and like nice boy next door who treats you like a queen, but somehow that kindness is rerouted into being dull and thus undesirable. And I really like that Amy Heckerling saw that split, was like, no, 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 no. Kindness is desirable.
Yeah.
Kindness is the thing you want to seek out. And so you see this across the male leads in the story. Like Paul Rudd plays Josh to be a kind, good man, but also like really funny, really smart, really entertaining, very sexy, very attractive, right? Like these things can exist at the same time. And you see the same thing with Donald Faison and the other love interests.
I can't even imagine, by the way, you mentioned in the book that Dave Chappelle was up for that role. I cannot envision it doesn't even compute in my brain. Like I'd have to go to AI to type this out just because I cannot envision Dave Chappelle playing the role that Donald Faison plays.
I think that's why he wasn't cast. They talked about this in some behind the scenes featurettes, right? They wanted to cast actors with these innocent, childlike outlooks and
Mhm.
personalities, and Dave Chappelle was just a little too jagged, maybe a little too world wise, right? You needed to situate these as high school kids, but also like they're almost like kindergartners, really, right? They're just so happy and peppy, like little puppies. And so Donald Faison really brings that like goofy, silly energy to the movie. And I think that's what makes him so charming when he's having these big fights with Dion. Because if those fights, like if the tenor changes even a little, suddenly it goes from like, oh, this is a couple doing like the thing they do,
Yeah.
to like, ooh, I don't know,
Yep.
girl, maybe not him. So it's really crucial that they cast someone like Faison.
You are so right in that. And I never thought about that until this conversation or this book, but like the casting of some of these characters is done so perfectly to keep it from crossing that line, because so easily, so many times in the film, things could cross that line and become like, oh man, what am I watching? But
Mhm.
they have it perfect. They really put this thing together so well.
It's so finely tuned to stay in that light register, but while also having this like satirical sharpness. I
Mhm.
really think that it's a pitch perfect comedy. Even scenes that should be objectively dark, like when Cher is held up in her Alaya dress, like she's mugged, she's robbed, she's left on the side of like the road in the dark, right? That's a dangerous situation. But the movie still manages to imbue it with lightness and funniness and like charming performances, even by the mugger who takes Cher's purse and then says thank you and then runs away, right? So it's just a really finely calibrated comedy. Amy Heckerling, she did a great work, girl.
Oh, yeah, that was so good. I will say the most unrealistic part of the film is the fact that this particular group of kids all went to see the Mighty Mighty Bosstones in 1995, because they weren't really a thing. Ska hadn't broken yet. They weren't really a thing yet. And I'm like, these kids are not going to see the Mighty Mighty Bosstones. I'm sorry. It's just not happening.
In the original script, it was supposed to be, oh my goodness, what is their name? It's this band with Josephine Wiggs. It's this like Luscious Jackson. It was supposed to be
Oh,
Luscious
oh, even
Jackson.
less realistic.
Really? Oh my
I
gosh.
mean,
Okay,
Luscious
so
Jackson like at least had like a hit around that time, if my memory
mhm.
serves correctly, and I'm drawing a blank on what the hit was, but I have the CD. I can picture it. I just can't think of what the song was. But
Is it Here? Is it called Here, maybe?
it's gonna.
Doesn't matter.
You
I'm
know what
sorry.
though? It's gonna drive me crazy until I look it up.
Yeah.
So we're gonna do.
Because
Uh,
there was a tie-in music video where some of the girls from the cast of Clueless were in a Luscious Jackson video.
okay.
Because they were supposed to be in the film and it didn't work out, and so they did that.
Naked Eye was their
Naked
song.
Eye, that's
With
it.
the naked
Yes.
eye, I
I
saw. Oh no, yeah.
saw. Yeah.
Which I was actually thinking about the Clueless soundtrack, because I know you don't really go into that in the book that much, but like it's one of the iconic soundtracks when you look back at soundtrack history. And sadly, the supermodel woman Jill Sobule, who sang the song "Supermodel,"
Mhm.
she just passed away a couple of weeks ago.
Oh.
I was thinking about her and the soundtrack when she passed away. I was like, oh my gosh, like she was supermodel in
Mhm.
Clueless, and like what an iconic song for a movie and everything. I mean, just yeah. So like that was from an era where soundtracks really meant a lot, and
Mhm.
there's just
Mhm.
so many that go down in pop culture history as absolutely incredible. And Clueless has to be up in that top 20 for sure, without a doubt.
It's such a great soundtrack. It's fantastic. It's listenable end to end. It's got like Radiohead, but which represents Josh and
Yes, of
his
course.
college mindset. But then it's got these absolute poppy bops. Just mentioning the supermodel Jill Sobule song. I mean, that kind of goes back to our conversation about how this movie has to sort of like be very careful about admitting darkness. So in some of those lyrics, she has lyrics like, I'm not going to eat today. I'm not
Mhm.
going to do XYZ, sort of talking about the actual life of a supermodel, right? Disordered eating is in the 1990s, at least, all but guaranteed. And I remember reading that Amy Heckerling was like, we cannot sample that part of the song during the makeover montage. Like it can be snarky, but we cannot go there like directly. Right. So again, sort of this is the two-handed trick of a great comedy. You're sort of always tabling that darkness to keep it light. And I don't know. I think some people maybe I wonder what you think of this. Is that inaccurate or is that just like a tonal choice?
I don't know if the words are going to come out of my mouth in the correct way that my brain is trying to say them. But I was thinking about this earlier in our conversation talking about kids. I think there are moments that happen in some of these movies when we look back on them that are designed more like I think Kids was designed to scare upper middle class suburban
Mm.
white women and moms to scare, like I don't think it was made for entertainment of the people that are in the age group of the film. I don't think it was made
Mm.
to entertain 16-year-olds. I think it was made to scare people that are older and try to get awards because it's so
Mm.
edgy and so I think looking again at what you were saying about how there's a fine line on so many things in Clueless, where if you cross that line just a little bit, it changes the entire tone of the movie. And
Mhm.
I knowing what you just said about taking certain parts of the song and not putting them in the movie. I think that is important. Like, I think that you're trying to show an image of a real person, and eating disorders were 100% real. It is now. It was then. It was maybe a more talked about thing back then than maybe it is now. It is very real, but at the same time, that's not who Cher is. Cher does not have an eating disorder. Cher is not, she's concerned about her appearance, but she's not seen throughout the movie going, I better eat ice cubes today because otherwise I'm going to put on weight. That's not who Cher is. So if you put that, you're making a judgment on Cher. And you're implying that Cher is this, like so many other girls are, but this movie isn't about everybody else. It's about Cher.
Yeah,
I hope that made sense. Like, I'm trying to, I don't know.
No, it does. And I think it's really, I like your point about kids is right. Like, critics lauded this as like, what a
Sure.
gritty movie. But like, did actual kids in New York living through that stuff, were they like, yeah, kids really got it right? Or did it sort of seem maudlin and over the top to them? I'm not sure. But what that brings me back to something that is kind of interesting about Cher's character, which is that, yeah, Amy Heckerling, she's making these social critiques in uneven ways and about uneven subjects. So, for instance, you do get a lot of sequences in the movie where Cher will sort of have these throwaway comments like, I ate 2 frappuccinos. I feel like such a heifer. Or she's always doing, she's doing these at-home workout tapes, or she's telling Dion, you have to cut it really, really small because that takes time. And then that also burns calories. So there are these little jokes, light little jokes peppered in about, a lot of this girl's mental real estate is taken up with like, I can't be fat. I cannot gain weight. But then in the movie, the film also has these other political arguments where it just sort of seems to say that if we ignore something bad, it will go away. And I'm thinking in particular about ideas about like racism and classism. It just sort of doesn't look those in the face and says, if I can imagine a world past this, we will get there. But I think maybe, and this is something I explore more in the chapter, it's probably coming out a little discombobulated now, but Heckerling is sort of picking and choosing about what issues she maybe is tackling head on, which means that ultimately, and this is one of the ways in which the film sort of falters. I think it's so wonderful in so many ways. But it does tend to maybe have this really pointed critique about gender, and then that really does fall flat in terms of race and class, especially when you think carefully about how Dion and Ty are treated. Yeah, so food for thought.
Yeah, and I think too, sometimes we look back and I think we want more out of a film that, like, I think we get a taste, right? Like we're eating the meal, now we want dessert, and sometimes maybe it's just the meal. Maybe we have to look at it for what it is and not think, well, you got point A, B, and C, but you missed D, E, F. Like maybe the point was to give you A, B, C. The point wasn't to give you, and so I completely see your point. And I think they do miss on some things, especially in that time period. But at the same time, I also think you can't have everything. No. Or again, it becomes a very different movie. I mean, if they start working race and all that, like now you've completely changed everything, because now Cher is Cher really still the main character? Like this beautiful, rich, white girl, like bopping around. Is she going to be the main character of a race movie? Like, I don't know.
No, yeah. And I think I take your point fully, right? I personally, I can get very impatient with pop culture criticism that's sort of like, well, because these elements of the movie track with what I think now 40 years later, that means the movie is good. And anything that doesn't do that is short-sighted and thus bad. And it's sort of like, well, I understand that, and I think it's fair to point it out. On the other hand, that makes for really predictable analysis. Right. And it's sort of like, well, I don't really need to read this article because I know what it will say. And then I also think that is maybe an uncharitable way to read something. So like, for instance, everything we do in a particular time and place. And I know that 30 years from now, the things I say and think and put on paper, someone else is going to come around and be like, she got that wrong. And I probably do. We all do. Right. But you need the humility to be like, but someone was trying. Right. And that's something that I write at the end of the book when I've sort of weighed all these different aspects. Part of the conclusion is about, I get this. We're in this sort of phase right now of cultural criticism that can be kind of cancely, right? To focus on what someone does wrong rather than what they try to do right. And at the end, I really do want to amplify all the things this movie does try to put forward. Because nothing is perfect, and also perfection is boring. Like, I want something muddy and complex that I can sink my teeth into. So I take your point. I do.
Yeah, I do think it's hard. Like I think you can look back at things like maybe like 16 Candles. We could have an issue with Long Duck Dong because even back then that was kind of wrong. Like that shouldn't
Yeah.
the way they portrayed that character was pretty inappropriate. So we could have an issue with that. But if we want to talk about the way culture has shifted and other things like in Conversations in Clueless, I look back to the way I was talking to my friends in 1994 and 1995. Like it's vastly different than the way that I speak to my friends now. It's just, that's just the way the world shifts. And it is hard. It's hard to look back at some of these things with a fine tooth comb without finding some things that are going to look wrong, that are going to look strange. But again, that's a snapshot into a piece of time in this history. And that's, going back to the point of this whole book series in general, that this is a part of, that's what pop culture is. Pop culture gives you that snapshot into that time period of our history, and it arguably gives it to you better than a history book would, because that's the quote unquote big important stuff, right? But this is how people lived. This is how we lived our lives through a window in 1995.
Yeah, and that makes me think about nostalgia. And I mean, this is the 30th anniversary of Clueless coming out. And that was part of how I got this book off the ground. I was like, wouldn't it be great if this could come out in 2025? But nostalgia, to look at something from a nostalgic point of view, is to see it in a limited and incomplete way, right? It's to remember it as maybe shinier than it truly was. And so sometimes it's really interesting to take something that you loved back in 1994 and your memory of it, and then to re-encounter the object itself. And one of the nice things about Clueless at large is that so often, when I think like, oh, I really like that movie, and I go back and watch it, and sometimes it can happen that you watch it again and all the magic is gone. You can only, like, the flaws and the differences are so pronounced that you struggle to see what was magical about it in the first place. And one of the things that I really appreciate about Clueless is that this movie is endlessly rewatchable. Like there's so many clever turns of phrase in the script. There's this real visual richness with the costumes, even with background actors. There's always more that this film can give to you. So it's a really good rewatch. Yeah. And I think that's ultimately what I want to amplify, is that something doesn't have to be perfect for you to recognize what is so special and good about it. And there's so much goodness here.
The one thing that I didn't get to that I really wanted to before I let you go is the title of the book, which I think is the most perfect title you could have about a book about Clueless. And it's Ugh, As If, because that is just the seminal scene that I think so many people know from Clueless. But you talk about in your book, and I'd never thought about it this way before, about how you absolutely need to have both of those phrases together or it does not work.
Yes, so often, and actually another reason to use Ugh As If is because there is already a book on Clueless with As If as the title.
Is there really? Okay.
There is. It's a behind-the-scenes oral history by the pop culture journalist Jen Chaney. It was a really helpful source for me while I worked through this. Thanks, Jen. But I decided to go with Ugh As If because it's not the same. Like, you need the context in the scene of her really viscerally shoving this boy off of her. So the scene, for listeners, if you don't quite recall, is that Cher is giving this monologue about why she doesn't have a high school boyfriend. She's like, they're like dogs. You have to clean them and maintain them and blah, blah, blah. And as she's saying this in her head, a boy that we don't know and never see again comes and puts his arm around her. And so she responds the way I wish I could have responded when I was in high school, or I mean, even now, by really forcefully shoving him off and going, oh, as if you could touch me, as if I would have time for you if you treat me like this. And so I think that visceral, like guttural, like, rejection is just so key, and also gets to that Ditz character angle, right? Of, because she's in the world, but she hasn't internalized all its sort of snares. Something that I definitely would have done at her age, been like, oh, someone's going to touch me in a way that makes me uncomfortable. It's like, oh, better not rock the boat, better not make them upset. She can just really viscerally react. So yeah, you need the Ugh.
You do. And there is also something to that, going back to the social status conversation about the movie, where like Cher is Queen Bee. Like so she can, not that anybody should ever feel uncomfortable pushing somebody off that's giving you an unwanted touch, but she can push them off. And no one's going to be like, oh, I can't believe Cher did. They're going to be like, good for you, Cher. But like, say someone, say Ty at that point in the film pushes someone off, they're going to be like, what is this girl doing? Like, who does she think she is pushing me? Like, there is, again, that's the social hierarchy of this movie that they touch on throughout it. Cher has that ability. You know, like she's in that world where she can.
Yeah, this loops us back to the superpower that is social power, right? She can do what she wants because she's the Captain Marvel of 1995 Beverly Hills.
Yes, she
Yeah.
is. You also, and your footnotes in this book are fantastic, and I love the
Oh,
footnotes.
thank you.
You talk about in the book to you. I forget if it's a footnote or if it's part of the book, but you talk about Alicia Silverstone. Oh yeah, it was a footnote where they cast her and they made her this character in some ways, in part to like break out of that Aerosmith rock chick view that she had. But now, you know, hindsight is 2020. Looking back on it, I feel like Cher is much more close to who she became as an adult in general. I feel like that overprivileged white, like that we're seeing so much, because she's done some interesting things in her life as an adult.
She's too into RFK Jr.
Aren't they all?
Oh, woof. Yeah, Alicia, you're so electric on screen. Please revisit that.
And please,
No more.
You're Canadian. You don't have to deal with this the same way that we do here in America, okay? So give me...
I'm going to get hives if I think about that too much.
Well, listen, Veronica, this really is fascinating. I mean, we only even scratched the surface, I feel, of how deep we could have this conversation, but our Zoom link is going to expire, and I don't want it to kick us off before I get to properly thank you and say goodbye. Talking about the Ditzes, just so many interesting things there that I never really thought about. Like, it really opened my eyes to a lot of things that I had never noticed in the movie, despite the fact that I've seen it 7,000 times in my life and continued to enjoy it, as you mentioned, it being rewatchable. Veronica, where can people go if they want to find out more about you or the book?
So the book is available on June 3rd. You can buy it at any bookseller. I recommend that you shop indie, shop local, support the little guy. I am, for reasons that will take another 40 minutes to outline, I am not really on the internet. But
Good for you, honestly.
Thanks. Makes promoting a book a little harder,
Sure.
but that's the choice I've made and I feel good about it. But if you Google me, you can find my profile at my workplace. I work at a university on the East Coast of Canada. And if you want to get in touch, you can email me there and I'd love to hear from you. But yeah, Jeff, thank you so much for having me on. You're a professional and you're a really great interviewer. And this was a real pleasure to chat with you.
Well, this was fun, especially, first of all, thank you very much for the comments. That means a lot. But it was fun to talk about something like this where it's serious but not serious. Like, the world isn't going to end because of this conversation about Clueless. Not that any of my conversations are going to dictate how the world shapes up, but like some people, when they're pitching their book, it's just about a much more serious topic. Where this is lighthearted, fun. And I love discussing pop culture from certain eras, especially my teenage years in the 90s. Like, it's such a great conversation to me. So thank you very much for doing this and inspiring the conversation.
Thanks so much, Jeff. Really appreciate it.
Big thank you to Veronica for her time. This conversation truly was an absolute joy to have. This podcast is being published on May 30th, and her book, Ugh, As If, comes out on June 3rd. I just love saying that. I highly suggest you check it out. And thank you to all of you for listening to the Adult Education Podcast. Until next time, be well.